One Christmas was so much like the other. In those days around the Seatown corner now, out of all sound except the distant speaking of the voices I sometimes hear a moment before sleep, that I can never remember whether it snowed for 6 days and 6 nights when I was 12, or whether it snowed for 12 days and 12 nights when I was 6. All the Christmases rolled down towards the two-tongued sea like a cold and headlong moon bundling down the sky that was our street. And they stop at the rim of the ice-edged, fish-freezing waves. And I plunge my hands into the snow and bring out whatever I can find. In goes my hand into that wool-white, bell-tongued ball of holidays resting at the rim of the carol-singing sea, and out come Mrs. Prothero and the firemen. It was on the afternoon of the day of Christmas Eve, and I was in Mrs. Prothero's garden waiting for cats with her son Jim. It was snowing. It was always snowing at Christmas. December in my memory is white as Lapland, although there were no reindeer, but there were cats. Patient, cold and callous. Our hands wrapped in socks, we waited to snowball the cats. Sleek and long as jaguars, and horrible-whiskered, spitting and snarling, they would slide and sidle over the white-backed garden walls. And the lynx-eyed hunters, Jim and I, fur-capped and moccasined trappers from Hudson Bay, off of Mumbles Road, would hurl our deadly snowballs at the green of their eyes. The wise cats never appeared. We were so still, Eskimo-footed Arctic marksmen in the muffling silence of the eternal snows, eternal ever since Wednesday, that we never heard Mrs. Prothero's first cry from her igloo at the bottom of the garden, or if we'd heard it at all, it was to us like a far-off challenge of our enemy and prey, the neighborhood's polar cat. But soon the voice grew louder. "Fire!" cried Mrs. Prothero, and she beat the dinner gong, and we ran down the garden with snowballs in our hands towards the house, and smoke indeed was pouring out of the dining room, and the gong was bombilating, and Mrs. Prothero was announcing ruin like a town crier in Pompeii. Oh, this was better than all the cats in Wales standing on the wall in a row. We bounded into the house, laden with snowballs, and stopped at the open door of the smoke-filled room, and something was burning all right. Perhaps it was Mr. Prothero, who always slept there after midday dinner with a newspaper over his face. But he was standing in the middle of the room saying, "A fine Christmas," and smacking at the smoke with a slipper. "Call the fire brigade," cried Mrs. Prothero as she beat on the gong. "They won't be here," said Mr. Prothero. "It's Christmas." There was no fire to be seen, only clouds of smoke, and Mr. Prothero there, standing in the middle of them, waving his slipper as if he were conducting. "Do something," he said, and we threw our snowballs into the smoke. I think we missed Mr. Prothero and ran out of the house to the telephone box. "Let's call the police as well," Jim said, "and the ambulance, and Ernie Jenkins, he likes fires." But we only called the fire brigade, and soon the fire engine came, and 3 tall men in helmets brought a hose into the house, and Mr. Prothero got out just in time before they turned them on, and nobody could have had a noisier Christmas Eve. And when the firemen turned off the hose and were standing in the wet, smoky room, Jim's aunt, Miss Prothero, came downstairs and peered at them. And Jim and I waited, very quietly to hear what she would say to them. She said the right thing, always. She looked at the 3 firemen in their shining helmets, standing among the smoke and cinders and dissolving snowballs, and she said, "Would you like anything to read?" Years and years ago, when I was a boy, when there were wolves in Wales and birds the color of red flannel petticoats whisked past the harp-shaped hills, when we sang and wallowed all night and day in caves that smelt like Sunday afternoons in damp front farmhouse parlors, and we chased with the jawbones of deacons the English and the bears before the motor car, before the wheel, before the duchess-faced horse, when we rode the daft and happy hills bareback. It snowed and snowed. But here a small boy says, "It snowed last year too. I made a snowman, and my brother knocked it down. And I knocked my brother down, and then we had tea." But it was nothing like the same snow, I say. Our snow was not only shaken from whitewash buckets down the sky, it came shoaling out of the ground and swam and drifted out of the arms and hands and bodies of the trees. Snow grew overnight on the roofs of houses like pure and grandfather moss, minutely ivied the walls and settled on the postman opening the gate like a dumb, numb thunderstorm of white-torn Christmas cards. Oh, were there postmen then too? With sprinkling eyes and wind-cherry noses. On spread frozen feet they crunched up the doors and mittened on them manfully, but all that the children could hear was a ringing of bells. "You mean that a postman went rat-a-tat-tat on and the doors rang?" "No, I mean that the bells that the children could hear were inside of them." "Well, I only hear thunder sometimes, never bells." "Oh, there were church bells too." "Inside of them?" No, in the bat-black, snow-white belfries, tugged by bishops and storks, and they rang their tidings over the bandaged town, over the frozen foam of the powder and ice cream hills, over the crackling sea. It seemed like all the churches boomed for joy under my window, and the weathercocks crew for Christmas on our fence. Well, get back to the postmen. Oh, they were just ordinary postmen, fond of walking, and dogs, and Christmas, and the snow. They knocked on the doors with blue knuckles. Ours has a black knocker. And then they stood on the white welcome mat in the little drifted porches and huffed and puffed, making ghosts with their breaths, and jogged from foot to foot like small boys wanting to go out. And then the presents, after the Christmas box. And the cold postman with a rose on his button nose tinkled down the tea tray slithered run of the chilly glinting hill. He went in his ice-bound boots like a man on fishmonger's slabs. He wagged his bag like a frozen camel's hump, dizzily turning the corner on one foot, and by God, he was gone. Well, get back to the presents. There were useful presents, engulfing mufflers of the old coach days, and mittens made for giant sloths, and zebra scarves of a substance like silky gum that could be tug-of-warred all the way down to the galoshes. blinding tam-o'-shanters like patchwork tea cozies and button-suited busbies and balaclavas for the victims of head-shrinking tribes. And from ants who always wore wool next to their skin. They were mustachioed and rasping vests that made you wonder why ants had any skin left at all. And once I had a little crocheted nose bag from an ant, now, alas, no longer whinnying with us, and pictureless books in which small boys, though warned with quotations not to, would skate on Farmer Giles' pond and did, and drowned. And books that told me everything about the wasp except why. We'll go on with the useless presents. Bags of moist and many-colored jelly babies and a folded flag and a false nose and a tram conductor's cap and a machine that punched tickets and rang a bell. Never a slingshot. Once, by mistake, that no one could explain, a little hatchet and a celluloid duck that made, when you pressed it, a most unduck-like sound, a mewing moo that an ambitious cat might make if it wished to be a cow, and a painting book in which I could make the grass and the trees and the sea and the animals any color I please. And still, the dazzling sky blue sheep are grazing in the red field under the rain-billed and pea-green birds. It's hung on the wall right behind you, still. Hard-boiled and toffee and fudge and all sorts, crunches and cracknel, humbugs, glaciers, marzipan and butterwelch for the Welch, and troops of bright tin soldiers who, if they could not fight, could always run, and snakes and families, and happy ladders, and easy hobby games for little engineers, complete with instructions. Oh, easy for Leonardo. And a whistle that made dogs bark, to wake up the old man next door, to make him beat on the wall with his stick to shake our pictures off the wall. And a packet of cigarettes. You put one in your mouth and you stood at the corner of the street waiting for hours in vain for an old lady to scold you for smoking a cigarette, and then, with a smirk, you ate it. And then there was breakfast under the balloons. Were there uncles like in our house? Oh, there was always uncles at Christmas. The same uncles. And on Christmas mornings, with dog-disturbing whistle and sugared fags, I would scour the swathed town for the news of the little world, and find, always, a dead bird at the post office, or the white deserted swings, perhaps a robin, all but one of his fires out. And men and women waiting, scooped back from the chapel with taproom noses and wind-bust cheeks, and all albinos, huddled their stiff black jarring feathers against the irreligious snow. And mistletoe hung from the gas brackets from all the front parlors. And there were sherry and walnuts and bottled beer and crackers by the dessert spoons. And cats in their furabouts watched the fires. And the high-heaped fires spat, all ready for the chestnuts and the mulling pokers. Some few large men sat in the front parlors without their collars, uncles most certainly, trying their new cigars, holding them out judiciously at arm's length and returning them to their mouths, coughing, and then holding them out again as if waiting for the explosion. And some few small ants, not wanted in the kitchen or anywhere else for that matter, sat on the very edges of their chairs, poised and brittle and afraid to break like faded cups and saucers. Not many of those mornings trod the piling streets. An old man, always fawn-bouldered, yellow-gloved, and at this time of year with spats of snow, would take his constitutional to the white bowling green and back as he would take it wet or fire on Christmas Day or Doomsday. And sometimes 2 hale young men with big pipes blazing, no overcoats, and wind-blown scarves would trudge unspeaking down to the forlorn sea and to work up an appetite to blow away the fumes. Who knows? To walk into the waves until nothing of them was left but the 2 curling smoke clouds on their inextinguishable briars. And then I would be slap-dashing home, the gravy smell of dinners of others, the bird smell, the brandy, the pudding, the mince, just coiling up into my nostrils, when out of a snow-clogged side lane would come into sight in a shop window a boy the spit of myself with a pink-tipped cigarette and the violet past of a black eye, cocky as a bullfinch, leering all to himself, and I hated him on sight and sound, and would be about to put my dog whistle to my lips and blow him off the face of Christmas, when suddenly he, with a violet wink, put his whistle to his lips and blew so stridently, so high, so exquisitely loud, that gobbling faces, their cheeks bulged with goose, would press against their tinseled windows the whole length of the white echoing street. For dinner, we had turkey and blazing pudding, and after dinner the uncles sat in front of the fire and loosened all buttons and put their moist hands over their watch chains and groaned a little and slept. Mothers and aunts scuttled to and fro bearing tureens, and Aunt Bessie, who had already been frightened twice by a clockwork mouse, whimpered at the sideboard and had some elderberry wine. The dog was sick, and Aunt Dossie had to have 3 aspirin, but Auntie Hannah, who liked port, stood in the middle of the snow-bound backyard singing like a big-bosomed thrush. I would blow up balloons just to see how big they would blow up to, and then when they burst, which they all did, uncles jumped and rumbled. In the rich and heavy afternoon, the uncles breathing like dolphins, snow descending, I would sit among the festoons and the Chinese lanterns and nibble dates and try to make a man of war model following the instructions for the little engineers, and produce, which might be mistaken for a seagoing tram car. Or I would go out, my brand new boots squeaking in the white world on the seaward hill, and call on Jim and Dan and Jack and pad through the still streets, leaving huge footprints on the hidden pavements. I bet people will think they've been hippos. What would you do if you saw a hippo coming down our street? Well, I'd go
bang, and I'd throw him over the railings, and I'd roll him down a hill, and then I'd tickle him under the ear, and he'd wag his tail. Well, what would you do if you saw 2 hippos? Iron-flanked and billowing, hippos clanked and battered through the scudding snow towards us. As we passed Mr. Daniels' house, let's post Mr. Daniels a snowball through his letterbox. Ooh, that's right, things in the snow with us. Shh. That's right, Mr. Daniels looks like a spaniel all over his lawn. Or we walked on the white shore. Can the fishes see when it's snowing? The silent one-clouded heavens drifted on the sea, and now we were snow-blind travelers, lost on the North Hills, and vast dew-lapped dogs with flasks around their necks ambled and shambled up to us, obeying, "Excelsior!" We returned home through the poor streets where only a few children fumbled with bare red fingers in the wheel-rutted snow, and cat called after us, and their voices fading away as we trudged uphill into the cries of the dockbirds in the hooting ships out on the whirling bay. And then, at tea, the recovered uncles would be jolly, and the ice cake loomed in the center of the table like a marble grave. Aunt Hannah laced her tea with rum because it was only once a year. Bring out the tall tales now that we told by the fire, as the gaslight bubbled like a diver, ghosts who hooed like owls in the long night when I dared not look over my shoulder. Animals lurked in the cubby hole under the stairs where the gas meter ticked. And I remember that we went singing carols once when there wasn't a shaving of a moon to light the flying streets. At the end of a long road was a drive that led up to a large house, and we stumbled up the darkness of the drive that night, each one of us afraid, each one holding a stone in his hand just in case, and all of us too brave to say a word. The wind through the trees made noises as of old and unpleasant, and maybe web-footed men wheezing in caves, and we reached the black bulk of the house. What shall we give them? Hark the herald? No, said Jack. Good King Wenceslas, I'll count 3. 1, 2, 3. And we began to sing, our voices high and seemingly distant in the snow-filtered darkness around the house that was occupied by nobody we knew. We stood close together near the dark door. Good King Wenceslas, look out on the feast of Stephen. And then a small, dry voice like the voice of someone who has not spoken for a long time, joined our singing. A small, dry, eggshell voice from the other side of the door. A small, dry voice through the keyhole. And when we stopped running, we were outside our house. The front room was lovely. Balloons floated under the hot water bottle, gulping gas. Everything was good again and shone over the town. Perhaps it was a ghost, Jim said. Perhaps it was trolls, Dan said, who was always reading. "Let's go in and see if there's any jelly left," Jack said. And we did that. Always on Christmas night there was music. An uncle played the fiddle. A cousin sang Cherry Ripe, and another uncle sang Drake's Drum. It was very warm in that little house. Annie Hannah, who had got on the parsnip wine, sang a song about bleeding hearts and death. And then another, she said her heart was like a bird's nest, and then everyone laughed again, and I went to bed. Looking through my bedroom window out into the moonlight and the unending smoke-colored snow, I could see the lights in the windows of all the other houses on our hill and hear the music rising from them up the long, steadily falling night. I turned the gas down and I got into bed. I said some words to the close and holy darkness, and then I slept.